Hello everybody, and welcome to another one of my car videos. I don't know what else to call it besides car videos. These are the videos that I make when I'm early to a gig or to a rehearsal or to a workshop or something. And I'm sharing with you the thoughts that are just popping into my head. Now in the last video, the last car video, we were talking about culture and how I have this thing against academia. The word I used was quarantine. I don't think it's right to quarantine the music from the people. And for that reason, I think I have to be clear about that, because what I'm talking about is not the history, right? Someone could come back and say, nobody said this yet, but someone could come back and say, well, we learned about the history of jazz in school. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the history of the people. I'm talking about being part of that culture. So, on the way here, I was thinking, the exception to what I'm saying about academia is classical music. If you want to be a genuine classical musician, academia is the only way to go, because that is the culture. I hope that makes sense. Academia is the only way to go if you want to be a classical musician, because classical music is academic music. And this whole thing that I'm saying applies. There's nothing different about what I'm saying. Okay? You have to be part of that culture, right? Well, classical music, academia is that culture. So that's the exception to what I'm trying to say. But if you try to learn jazz in an academic culture, so far, now I'm not saying it's not possible, but so far what I've seen with my own two eyes, and what I've read about, and to the extent of my knowledge, if you want to learn jazz or any other style of music for that matter, the way they do it is to isolate all the musical aspects in sort of the same way as you would classical music, right? But see, that's where it's departing. You cannot. In the case of classical music, you're not isolating the music from the culture, because academia is that culture. So, for example, when we play a Strauss waltz, that has now, what we call classical music today has adopted and completely the Strauss music, right? It wasn't academic originally. Are you following me? That music wasn't academic. It's academic today. When we call it classical music today, that the whole purpose of that music has changed. It doesn't serve the purpose it served originally. There's other musics like that I can think of, but just not off the top of my head. But yeah, so what we've created is this new genre, almost, what we call classical music. And I think that's born out of, I think what we call classical music is born out of the symphonic movement. If you think about it, what we call classical music today, culturally speaking, came out of the symphonic movement where things started moving out of the courts and into the huge concert halls so that the masses could be part of this music that was at one time part of the music at the courts. And you know, the same thing is true for the church music. So like when we're looking at Baroque music, you're looking at almost all of the great Baroque music that we play and call it classical music. It's been there's a word right on the tip of my tongue, not adopted, but I can't find the word. It's been taken from that church context and turned into what we call classical today. It no longer serves the purpose that it served back then. Back then, it was a form of worship. Today, it's no longer that. Today, we look at it. So I hope that's making sense. So what we call classical music today. And could this happen to jazz? Wow. I wouldn't like to see that. To tell you the truth, I would not like to see what... So look, just looking at the church music as an example. Because what we call classical music today that originally started off as church music has been stripped of all its churchy stuff. When we go and see this stuff at the concert hall, it is not a... Now, you can worship on your own, but that's not how it's being presented. Okay? It's not being presented as worship music. It's being presented quarantined from its original purpose and presented as part of this new genre that we call today classical music. Are you following me? And if we were to do that to jazz, it would be... It's sad about it's sad about the church music too. That's sad as well. The difference between it happening to the old church music and it happening to jazz is jazz hits a little closer to home, right? Because the church music, we're talking about stuff that happened 100 years ago. The jazz music, as removed as my jazz upbringing was from the greats. I didn't grow up in New York. I didn't grow up in New Orleans or Kansas City or Los Angeles. I grew up, musically speaking, in El Paso. And we had great music in El Paso. But, you know, you can't connect me, at least not directly, to the greats. However, my upbringing was consistent with, in terms of the cultural stuff, my musical upbringing in jazz was consistent with what I've been telling you, and when you read about Charlie Parker, when you read about all of the greats, their histories, my upbringing was similar to theirs. The way the music was handed down to me was a cultural phenomenon. It was not an academic phenomenon. Was I part of the jazz in schools? Yes, I was. But what really made the difference in my life was in high school, I think starting in my junior year. I didn't drive back then, but my buddy did. And we went and started hitting jam sessions. With the pros, not friends of ours. We were going and making friends of the professional players in town. And that culture of the jam sessions, the culture of the jazz, just the jazz culture in general, we became part of that culture through a process very similar to the same process that other jazz players who are famous describe in their upbringing. So for me to see that people are now, if we were to draw a parallel to what happened to church music becoming classical music, or what happened to Strauss waltzes becoming classical music. When we look at that and say maybe that's going to happen to jazz, that's a sad thought to ponder. Because the way jazz is now, it's alive. It's a living art form. Because of this cultural thing. If we were to make it more academic, where just like the church music, just like the waltzes, and there's other examples as well that classical music has taken and quarantined and taken as its own, right? There's other genres that classical has done that to. If this happens also to jazz, it will kill jazz. It will make it, as far as I'm concerned, impotent. And for classical, so this, I'm a walking contradiction, because as far as classical stuff goes, and when I say there's no other way to do it, I'm not saying that in a negative light. Classical music is a beautiful thing. I'm part of that culture too. Once again, not in the kind of way that would impress you. I'm not connected to the greats. But I came up through the system, academic system. I've done, I forget how many seasons of orchestral playing. I've played classical solos and classical rep. I've done a lot of brass quintet work. So, and that is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful music for what it is. And if you're part of that culture and you do it well, there's very few things in this world that are as uplifting and wonderful as classical music done right. But in the exact same sense, if you do that to the jazz will no longer exist. And what will really essentially happen is jazz will become part of classical music, just the way church music became part of classical music, just like the waltzes became part of classical music. And I think that would be a very sad thing. Just as sad as I think it is that the church music got neutered and enveloped into that classical genre. I would have loved to have seen this music. Of course, we're talking what's happened over a period of hundreds of years. But, just to think, if that had continued as a genre, that would have been amazing. Anyway, maybe a lot of you think, maybe a lot of you see it differently from how I do. And if you do, I would like to hear from you, I am in Galveston. Galveston from my house is about a 50-minute drive. I'm at the Opera House playing with a famous person. I won't tell you who the famous person is, okay? I did my video on famous people. I play with, I don't know, as many as a dozen famous people a year. I don't keep track of them all. I do have a list, but it's not a complete list. And this guy that I'm working with today adds one to the list. But I'm not going to tell you who it is because I don't really care much about that stuff. And I don't believe in coattail marketing, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to try to be more famous just because I've played with somebody else who's famous. I don't even want to be famous. What I want is to make more money doing what I do. And I'm not going to be shy about saying that. And the unfortunate part of that is more people need to know who you are for you to make more money. That makes sense, right? At least in music. And so a lot of times what I do might look like I'm trying to be more famous, but I really don't care. Stuff like that. You know, a great example of that is my album. The people who are listening to my album, and there's a bunch of them, I'm getting more streams than anybody I know on Spotify. And it's just getting better and better and better. Well, a minimum of 3,000 streams on Spotify a week. And I know for the famous people, that's not a big deal. For me, I don't know any of my local friends that are doing that well. So yeah, to me that's a big deal, and the fact that none of them know who I am, so that to me that's like a big score right there. That just tells you like what kind of person I am. I'm burning up in here. But yeah, so to me it was never an issue to me who the famous people I'm playing with are. But anyway, I better get in there. I've already warmed up, but I need to make sure I'm parking in the right place because it says don't park here. And I would hate to come back out and find my car someplace else, right? And anyway, so let me know what you think about this stuff, about the cultural thing. I would like to do one of these videos about, one of these car videos about perfection, because that's really been on my heart lately a lot. And it's actually very much connected to the whole cultural thing. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me a little bit before the gig. God bless you. We'll see you on the next video. See you later.